So I'm not gonna lie, I'm not sure how this recipe is going to be anything groundbreaking or ground shaking, because looking at it, it's pretty darn basic. But I figured I would take you along on my journey to make bangers and mash, deeply inspired by James Herriot's chapter in All Things Wise and Wonderful. So, what we're going to need, obviously, potatoes. I looked online and everybody had different advice as far as the potatoes goes. They were like, use Yukon Gold, use this, use that. I'm using russet because that's what I have. And I happen to know that it makes really good mashed potatoes because I make mashed potatoes all the time. So, I'm going to peel these, get them cut up, get them into my, this is, in my estimation of years of making mashed potatoes, the most important thing when you do mashed potatoes is to salt the water that you boil them in. Then you don't have to add salt later. You don't want it to be over salted, but generally it's about 2 teaspoons of salt for your medium saucepan. And yeah, after that we're going to fry up our mild Italian sausages, because that's what I found. And the only thing that's going to be any different for me at all as far as making this recipe is I found that you're supposed to have a onion, or more specifically, as told to you by a friend of mine who is from England, a mustard onion gravy to go on your bangers and mash. So I have this original stone ground mustard, and I have a couple of onions that I am going to do, and I am going to follow the recipe that I found. Other than that, because it seems to be traditional, I am making peas to go with my bangers and mash, but because I don't like peas nearly as much as carrots, I'm also going to go ahead and roast off some carrots, because roasted carrots are delicious. So, I guess it's time to just get to it. All right, after we have our carrots in the oven, we are going to just take our potatoes that we peeled and washed, and don't worry about anything like that because you just cut it out. I think the reason I love potatoes so much is the fact that they're like the perfect food, honestly. I absolutely love potatoes. You can't really go wrong with them. But yeah, you want to cut them up into about equal size pieces, but don't worry about it too much. Honestly, they're all going to boil, and it'll be fine. But yeah, we're just going to keep on doing this until we have our potatoes, and then we are going to cover it with water, add salt to our water, and then we're just going to boil them. Don't ask me how long to boil them. Honestly, I just boil them until I poke them with a fork and they're soft. It all kind of depends, and mashed potatoes are just one of those recipes that I only know how to make because I grew up making them with my mom and just watching what she did. And I think she probably had the exact same method of potato as probably her mom, and going back in time and back in time and back in time. I've never been one that wants to make potatoes fancy. Mashed potatoes are, in my mind, supposed to be the world's most basic food, but that's what makes them so good. So, we're not going to get fancy. We're not going to add all sorts of heated milk and heated cream. When we drain our potatoes, we are going to just add milk and butter and mash them. I know that there are 10 million different recipes for fancy mashed potatoes, but that is not the goal, at least from everything I've read, of bangers and mash. It's supposed to be just a very basic comfort food. So that is what we're going for. So yeah, we're just going to get the last potato chopped up, get it on to boil, and then we are going to move on to making our bangers, which again, fairly basic. Everything I read said you just fry them up about 10 to 12 minutes. And then we're going to stick them in the oven to make sure that they stay warm while we make our onion and mustard gravy. Now, something interesting that I did learn, and I think I said it when I was reading the chapter of All Things Wise and Wonderful that made me think of this, making this recipe, is that the reason that they ended up being called bangers instead of, like in the chapter, just sausages and mash, is because a lot of times the sausages that were used to make them had sort of cheap fillers in them, which would kind of burst the skin on the sausages with sometimes an audible bang, so they were just called bangers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Anyway, this is probably pretty boring, so I will turn you off until our sausages are browned and we can stick them in the oven. Now, while our bangers are banging away in the skillet back there, I am going to chop up for our onion mustard gravy one medium-sized onion, and it says to have it sliced fine. Not sure how fine I'm going to actually be able to slice it because my knife skills are just about non-existent, but we'll give it a try. Basically, the idea that they want you to go for is kind of onion shreds, and so that is what we're going to do. If anyone is wondering and has not seen any of my drawing videos where it's quite evident, yes, indeed, I am left-handed. So I'm not actually going to chop my fingers off. I usually don't, but I know that I make people nervous with my lack of knife skills. Thankfully, I usually keep my knives fairly sharp, which generally tends to keep me from getting cut. I think I saw that on some cooking show once upon a time, that is the secret to a safe knife, is that it's a sharp knife. So I'm just going to continue slicing up this onion, and we aren't going to be able to actually make the gravy until we have our sausage drippings in the pan. But I figured pre-slicing the onion might be a really good idea. As to any tips for not tearing up with onions, I don't have any, because ever since I started cooking with onions a lot more, even though I don't eat onions myself, I've noticed that the onions don't make me tear up anymore. So maybe just exposure? That could be it. Anyway, got my onions all chopped up. It ends up being probably about a cup or so of chopped onion. And we're going to make that with about a cup and a half of beef broth you're also going to need, and a tablespoon of mustard, and then we're going to thicken it with a cornstarch slurry, and that's pretty much about it. It did call for balsamic vinegar and sugar, which I'm going to go poking through the pantry, and if I have it, I will add it. If not, life goes on. Well, my bangers look like they did something, so I am going to transfer them to a casserole dish, cover them up nice and tight, and stick them in the oven so they don't get cold while we wait for everything else to finish cooking, because I think I probably cooked them a bit too soon. Now, the recipe that I found said to add a couple of tablespoons of oil and a little bit of butter. It specified unsalted, but again, I had salted, so that's what we got. To your sausage drippings, and then we are going to put the onions into that. And one of the things that it did say is we don't want to caramelize the onions, which might be pretty hard in a cast iron pot, but I'm going to do my best. What we want to do is just get them softening, and then we're going to add a couple of cups of beef bouillon, which it said beef stock. What I actually had was beef bouillon cubes that I softened in water to make my own beef stock. So, again, is this going to be the most authentic of all recipes? Probably not. Will it be tasty? Hopefully. I mean, we're going to keep giving it a good shot. Am I actually going to eat this gravy? Only if I can pick out all the onions. But, you know what? Sometimes you make stuff that you know you're not actually going to eat. Like I said, I will probably have some of this gravy. I'm just going to pick the onions out of it. I'm going to go ahead and add, that's 1 cup. And then I'm just going to use water, since that was 2 bouillon cubes dissolved in the 1 cup. And we're going to add another cup to that. And then we're just going to cover it and let it sort of do its little magical bubbling thing until this is nice and soft and the liquid has reduced some. So, we'll see you in a bit. Alright, well that is after about 10 minutes of cooking. The onions are definitely softened, and I did find balsamic vinegar. So the recipe that I found calls for a teaspoon, which I am literally just going to eyeball, of sugar. Which I've never put sugar in a gravy before, but you know what? We're going to follow the recipe as close as we can anyway. And I also found some balsamic vinegar in my cupboard, and it calls for, again, a teaspoon of that. So, there we go. I don't think I've ever used this stuff, especially not in a gravy. And I just said gravy really stupidly, but, you know, whatever. And it says to cook this for about a further 5 minutes. So, that is what we're going to do. Alright, our potatoes have done their thing. So, I'm going to add about a tablespoon of butter. And don't laugh at me too much. We don't actually use milk that often. So, I just bought this little tiny thing of milk. I don't heat the milk. I don't do anything special like that. I never have. I know a lot of people do, but I just don't. So, I'm just going to mash my potatoes while my gravy reduces a little bit more. And once that's done, all I have to do is make my peas. And I think once the gravy is thickened, which I'm just going to do with a slurry of cornstarch and water, we're going to be good to plate this. Kind of exciting. You know, I almost forgot the key ingredient to this onion mustard gravy is the tablespoon of stone ground mustard is what they recommend, although they said you can pretty much use any mustard, so if you were into like a hot mustard or something along those lines, you could use that. But we are going to add that, stir it in, and then we are going to thicken just using a slurry of cornstarch and water, which I know a lot of people thicken with flour. I never have. It's never been something that I actually was good at. Again, you can thank/blame my mother for that, because she never made a roux type gravy. It was always cornstarch. Now, the big thing with cornstarch gravy, oh, that smells really good. Okay, that's interesting. You can definitely smell the mustard. The big thing with cornstarch is you want to get it almost to boiling and just add a little at a time, stirring the whole time so that you don't get lumps. And that way you can also kind of let it thicken to the consistency that you want. I have seen it said on Google that you don't really want this to be the thickest gravy ever. You kind of want it to be thin and just soak right into your potatoes and your sausages and all of the rest. So I'm going to put a little bit more in, thicken it up a little bit more, and then I think once our peas are done, we're going to plate. And there we go. Bangers, mash, peas, and because I can't resist, roasted carrots. So I will let you know later on what I think about the whole thing. The little bit of the gravy that I tried, it's interesting. Don't know if it's ever gonna like replace beef gravy as a favorite of mine, but who knows, maybe it'll grow on me. Anyway, gonna go enjoy my meal. Alright, well, final thoughts on the bangers and mash. I figured we would take a little walk and I would process my thoughts on it. I don't think it's for me. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't taste good. It's just not going to be anything that I would consider a go-to comfort food. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've never been big on sausages anyway. So I was a little leery going into it. Plus the gravy, it had a really interesting flavor. But again, it was just one of those flavors that just wasn't, I guess, for me. But I can see how the dish got to be very, very popular. It does have a lot of flavor to it. Now the peas, they tasted like peas, so. And the mashed potatoes were phenomenal, but mashed potatoes are always phenomenal. And maybe if I were an onion lover, I might have had a lot more positive thoughts about it, but not really for me. Now, my older son thought that it was pretty darn good, and he really, really enjoyed it, and he liked the gravy a lot. So, am I going to add it to my repertoire of foods that I cook on a regular basis? Probably not. But, was it worthwhile? Definitely. And is it gorgeous outside? Oh, heck yeah. The fiddlehead ferns are all coming up and unfolding their cute little fiddleheads. The sun is shining. And I tried something new and something that was kind of outside of my comfort zone, so it was a good day. I definitely think that Tristan's version probably was worse than my version, but maybe not by much. I don't know. Drop it down in the comments if I did anything that was completely wrong in the cooking of it. Maybe that's why I didn't like it. Maybe I would have liked it better if I had used a different sausage. I don't know. But Anyway, it was totally worthwhile, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. Not really sure if I need to really drop the instructions in it. It was a pretty basic meal, so, you know, if you're really curious about the onion gravy, let me know, and I will drop the recipe that I used to you. But other than that, you know, not every meal is going to be a winner, at least for me. So, with that, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to finish my walk and digest my food. Have a great day.